tonight is the nation's first Somali-American state legislator. Please welcome Minnesota State Representative Ilhan Omar. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. But before we get started, I wanted to take a selfie.
Oh, well, let's do this. Let's do this.
Everyone wants to make sure I do that.
This is the millennial generation.
I am America's hope and the president's nightmare.
If you don't mind taking a step back, I'm sure people ask you about this a lot, though, but coming from a world where, you had to leave Somalia as a young child, you got a chance to travel through to the United States. How hard was it to get into America, seeing as the conversation always seems to be it's too easy to get in, we need to have extreme vetting? What was your vetting process like?
Yeah, I mean, when the war happened, I was 8. We came to the refugee camp and waited 4 years for that process to take place for us to relocate here to the U.S.
Right.
Our vetting process, from what I remember at the age of 12, is that it included my family filling out applications, having multiple interview process,
right.
Taking a lot of medical tests to see if we were healthy enough to be relocated to the United States. And it took, nearly 4 years for that process to be completed. And then once we came to the U.S., it took very long time for us to become legal.
Old guard, especially on the right, terrified of the group. It's yourself, it's Ocasio-Cortez, it's Rashida Tlaib. You have these people where everyone's just going they're troublemakers, they're here to cause chaos. Are you there to cause chaos?
I mean, they could hear us coming from afar, and I really believe it. All of us were ready and are still ready to throw down on behalf of the American people. We're ready to throw down and make sure that we're taking care of health care once and for all, and
right.
that we're making sure to get rid of for-profit prisons, and that we're going to cancel out student debt and free young people from, the shackles of debt.
Wow.
And so Trump and the Republicans could see us coming, and so they shut down the government. We want to make sure that the American people recognize government as one that works for them and works on behalf of their interests. We have a homeless crisis. We have people who are freezing. And what we can do with the money that we have is make sure that we're investing $20 billion in providing homes to our homeless folks.
Right.
That would get rid of homelessness in this country. What we can do is that we can stop the constant increase of our defense budget. Since 9/11, it increased nearly 50%. We have not had that high of an increase in education funding. Mm-hmm. We haven't had that kind of increase in healthcare funding, right? We don't invest in the things that actually positively impact people, but we are willing to invest in things that give contracts to companies and corporations that benefit from our struggles and our pains. And that's not gonna happen under our watch.
I hold the Americans responsible, the average American responsible, because their state support another country to invade your country or my country. When are we gonna decide or realize that terrorism is a reaction? Exactly.
Nobody wants to face how the actions of the other people that are involved in the world have contributed to the rise of the radicalization and the rise of terrorist acts. So usually most people want to not look internal and see what about their actions that makes another react. Nobody wants to take accountability of how these are byproducts of the actions of our involvement in other people's affairs.
This country was founded on the radical idea that we are created equal and endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. And yes, we have a long way before we fully live up to those values. It is for this reason precisely that we have to take action when a president is openly violating the oath he took to the Constitution of the United States and the core values we aspire to. As Martin Luther King said, all we say to America is, be true to what you say on paper. I believe this is a pivotal moment in our country. The eyes of history is watching us. Right now, the president is carrying out mass deportation raids across this country in each one of our districts. Right now, the president is committing human rights abuses at the border, keeping children in cages, and having human beings drinking out of toilets. This president, who has been credibly accused of committing multiple crimes, including colluding with foreign government to interfere with our election. This is a president who has overseen the most corrupt administration in our history and pursued an agenda to allow millions of Americans to die from a lack of health care while he transfers millions of dollars in tax cuts to corporations. This is a president who has said, grab women by the pussy. This is a president who's called black athletes sons of bitches. This is a president who has called black people who come from black and brown countries shitholes. This is a president who has equated neo-Nazis with those who protest against them in Charlottesville. This is a president who has openly violated the very value our country aspires to uphold: equality under the law, religious liberty, equal protection, and protection from persecution. And to distract from that, he's launching a blatantly racist attack on 4 duly elected members of the United States House of Representatives, all of whom are women of color.
He tells everyone he cannot.
I felt like I was watching a Klan rally last night, and Donald Trump was the grand imperial wizard, leading people in a chant telling a black woman, a member of Congress, to go home to Africa. That is racism. That is textbook racism. It should be condemned from the halls of Congress to the White House to every person who comes on television and speaks as a political expert.
Sind Sie persönlich, und ich bitte um eine persönliche Antwort, fühlen Sie sich persönlich solidarisch mit den attackierten Frauen?
Ja. Ja. Ich distanziere mich davon entschieden und fühle mich solidarisch mit den 3 attackierten Frauen.
It's taken us 240 years for us to have this unique composite of a Congress in this moment, and we will not go back. We will not go back. We will not go back to the days of injustice. We will not roll back our rights. We will not deny liberty to our trans brothers and sisters. We will not deny our own humanity at the border. We will not go back. We will go forward. But we sure as hell will not stand still.
When I said I was the hope of the United States, it's because I embody what that hope should look like. And when I said I was the president's nightmare, well, you're watching it now. Because his nightmare is seeing a Somali immigrant refugee rise to Congress. We are ready. Yes. We are in the ring. We are in the people's house, and we are going to continue to keep fighting until we have the America we know we all deserve. Thank you. Yeah.
Trump's remarks came one day after the House of Representatives voted to condemn his racist tweet, telling 4 progressive congresswomen of color, freshman representatives Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, to go back to the crime-infested places from which they came. 3 of the congresswomen were born in the United States. Omar is a naturalized U.S. citizen who was born in Somalia. She has been a citizen longer than First Lady Melania Trump.
I want to make sure that every single person who is in this country, who's aspiring to become part of the American fabric, understands that nothing this president says should be taken to heart. We are Americans as much as everyone else. This is our country, and we are where we belong. And I told people on my election night, in the great state of Minnesota, we don't just welcome refugees, we send them to represent us in Washington. And as much as he's spewing his fascist ideology on stage, telling U.S. citizens to go back because they don't agree with his detrimental policies for our country, we tell people that here in the United States, dissent is patriotic. Here in the United States, disagreement is welcome, debate is welcomed, and especially in the People's House, all of our voices are uplifted and heard.
On Thursday night, Congressmember Omar arrived back in the Twin Cities in Minnesota to a crowd of supporters at the airport. Her constituents had a new chant to greet her, "Welcome home."
You know, I think my response to this week is I think we have to continuously recognize that there's a certain segment of people in this country who imagine that the home of America is for white people, and that when people of color come into that home and criticize that home, they say, how dare you come into my home and criticize my home? You might as well go back to your home. But what if it's their home too? And what if they have the right to criticize it too? And what if they're trying to make that home better? And I think this sort of week has showed us that how we're sort of imagining who is American and what is America. And of course, that's a debate, as you know, Amy, we've been having for a very long time in this country.
I spoke to CPB agents, even though they told us not to speak to them too. Remember that? And I said, what do you think we need to do because you guys are overwhelmed? They said, one of them, stop sending money, it's not working. Another one said, I wasn't trained for this. I am not a social worker, not a medical care worker. He actually said, I want to be at the border. That's what I was trained to be at. The one other one, the last one, Mr. Chairman, the separation policy isn't working, he said. He knew about the separation policy that he was enacting. CPP morale is one of the lowest among law enforcement agencies, Mr. Chairman. Since between 2017 and 2018, we had a high of 100 agents committing suicide. That needs to be put in record. The dehumanization is not only with those families, but it's also with the agents that we've had told to do this to these families. Mr. Speaker, we do have a crisis at our border. It is one of morality. As we have seen this current strategy unfold, intentional and cruelly created by the Trump administration, dead set on sending a hate-filled message that those seeking refuge are not welcome in America, in our America, and that the rule of law, human rights will not protect them here. First, no one is illegal. That term is derogatory now because it dehumanizes people. You can say any other forms of maybe coming in without regulations or so forth, but the use of illegal is disrespectful, and I ask my colleagues to try in so many ways to not dehumanize our immigrant neighbors that are trying to come in for a safe haven. Mr. Speaker, while working at human service and community advocacy organizations, I learned early on that to truly bring power to the table, to see what is at stake, you have to bring people in the room who can't be here. So I'm asking for Jacqueline, whose was age 7, from Guatemala, who died from sepsis while in our care. She was the same age as my son when I heard about it. I've been so deeply haunted by the unforgettable image of a 4-year-old boy coming up to me through a glass door of a cell he was in with a number of other children, asked me in Spanish where his papa was, and slid a very small board to me so I could write something on it. It was like a dry board. Chairman, again, bringing those who can't be here into this room, I asked my colleagues to see a drawing from one of the children in the cages, in the cells, and I want you to not look away. I ask you and beg you not to look away. But the suffering in these illegal and immoral camps isn't just limited to those children. Something I learned, Mr. Chairman, is that mothers, fathers, grandparents who are suffering, ripped away from their families, not knowing if they ever see their children and loved ones again. I won't forget Daisy, the grandmother who had a red ribbon on her wrist with the name of the medication she needs, who said she had been in detention for 40 days. And she hadn't seen her grandson, who was mentally impaired, since being separated from him when they arrived. The fear in their eyes won't be forgotten, Mr. Speaker. The suffering in these illegal camps cannot be forgotten. Imagine traveling thousands of miles in grueling and dangerous conditions because you have no other option only to be separated from your family, from your children, thrown into overcrowded cages, denied a shower, toothbrush, and yes, Mr. Chairman, drink water out of the toilet if you're thirsty. Mr. Chairman, it needs to be noted into record.
I'm a little frustrated because I heard a lot about love. And one thing that I know is it's not because of the lack of love that we're not able to feed our children. It's not because of the lack of love that we are able to house people. It's not the lack of love that we are unable to save people from dying because they don't have health care. It's not because of lack of love that you were able to finish college because you got help with childcare.
If you get a good education and you work hard, you can do a lot. But love also helps. So I think the churches, being the son of a pastor, the love that you can nourish these folks is amazing.
Love has nothing to do with this. And if you want to bring love into this, you got to bring radical love. Because radical love means that we radically love every single person within our communities to make sure that we are providing for them the basic rights as humans. That's what love is. And that's the godly thing to do. So if we want to talk about faith, we also have to remember that we can't pray our problems away.
I don't find anywhere in the scripture where Jesus said that it was Caesar's job to feed the poor and to clothe the widows and to take care of the orphans. He said it was the church's. It's the church's responsibility.
You can't pray for your children to be fed, so you're not crying because they're crying and they can't go to bed. You cannot pray for your medical bills to disappear. You cannot pray for the mold to stop poisoning your children in the classrooms. The other thing that frustrates me is people who have experienced poverty, who have gotten the straps for their bootstraps, who sit and talk about how we shouldn't do anything for the next person.
Like some of these folks have said in here, I'm a product of being in poverty and found the only way out was to work my tail off. It's the American dream to come to a place where you have the opportunity to be as poor as you want to be or as wealthy as you want to be.
See, as someone who knows severe poverty, I lived in a refugee camp, on the floor, no water, nothing. And I hear somebody say here in the United States, they're fine with their grandparents not having running water?
My grandparents never had running water. They died not having running water.
And that's supposed to be okay? The conversations we get to have is how we are responsible for fully funding our schools so all of our children have the opportunities we have as we sit in this room. We get to talk about the kind of opportunities we have as government to make sure healthcare is provided to everybody so that we don't have people dying in the United States because they can't afford insulin.
The conversation we get to have is making sure that there are no children going to sleep hungry or being shamed in classrooms and in lunchrooms because their families don't have enough money to pay for their lunch. The conversation we get to have about the kind of poverty we have in this country is the kind of poverty that says it is okay for us to take photo pictures with veterans and be okay with the fact that they're sleeping on the streets here in the United States. So as an immigrant, as someone who came to this country, hearing about American exceptionalism and prosperity, I am appalled that we get to sit here and have conversations as Americans about being the most charitable country in the world and not being charitable enough to house our homeless, feed our children, care for our veterans. What is charitable about that?
34-year-old is a mother of 3.
You have young girls. What do you hope you do as far as changing the conversation about what they can become?
My daughter, since she was 5, has kind of talked about her desire to someday be president. And she sees that there is a path that someone like her mother is able to hold public office.
Because I'm a Muslim, I'm an immigrant, I'm a refugee, that I can't have any loyalty to our country. I took an oath. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. I am as American as everyone else is. But they wanted somebody who was going to speak the truth, somebody who brought an interesting and a different perspective, someone who was going to call out the hypocrisies not only of our government, but of politicians, and someone who is gonna stand up for everything that they might not even know that they care about. And so for me, when we're talking about taxes, and we're talking about canceling out student debt, or when we're talking about getting the Green New Deal, or when we're talking about having a federal jobs guarantee, or we're talking about getting investment in infrastructure or ending homelessness, they know that I bring a different perspective and understanding that there needs to be a holistic look at our budget, and none of those things can be prioritized if we're spending 57 cents on the dollar on defense, and these are the kind of conversations I get to have that a lot of my colleagues are not interested in, and many of the political pundits don't want to have. Every single statement that we make is from a place of extreme love for every single person in this country. It is part of the mandate of why we ran for office and why we got elected. Every single person wants to make sure that they have people in the halls of Congress that is fighting to make sure that they have health care, that they have an education that is suitable in the United States, that they have access to proper roads and bridges, that they have access to clean water and clean air. Every single person here in the United States knows that we are fighting every single day to create a more perfect union and to fight on their behalf. Now, when people say, if you say a negative thing about the policies in this country, you hate this country. To me, it sort of speaks to the hypocrisy, and Alex and I were talking about this. When this president ran, and until today, he talked about everything that was wrong in this country and how he was going to make it great. And so for him to condemn us and to say we are un-American for wanting to work hard to make this country be the country we all deserve to live in, it's complete hypocrisy.
Weak minds and leaders challenge loyalty to our country in order to avoid challenging and debating the policy. This president does not know how to make the argument that Americans do not deserve health care. He does not know how to defend his policies. So what he does is attack us personally. And that is what this is all about. He can't look a child in the face, and he can't look all Americans in the face and justify why this country is throwing them in cages. So instead, he tells us that I should go back to the great borough of the Bronx and make it better. And that's what I'm here to do.
Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question. That was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether you, under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question. Because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. That is my question. Will you make sure that human rights are not violated and that we uphold international and human rights?
I suppose there is a question in there, and the answer is that the entire thrust of American policy in Venezuela is to support the Venezuelan people's effort to restore democracy to their country. That's our policy.
I don't think anybody disputes that. The question I had for you is that does the interest of the United States include protecting human rights and include protecting people against genocide?
That is always the position of the United States.